Hello everyone, this is Mike History 2, and welcome to part 9 of the important ancestors of Elizabeth II. So, last time we finally looked at her most recent ancestors, such as Victoria and Albert, Edward VII, who is her grandfather, Edward VII, who is her great-grandfather, George V, who is her grandfather, and George VI, who is her father. And so now that that part has come to an end, I announce that we will finally be revealing the ancestry and genetic makeup of Elizabeth II. But before we do that, there are, of course, so many other royal ancestors that I just couldn't have mentioned, or else the series would have gone on forever and ever and ever. So, quick disclaimer, this video will basically just be me reading a very long list of all of Elizabeth II's royal ancestors from every major country of Europe. And so, if you just want to skip to a specific country, then just check the timestamps. I'll put timestamps in the description. And so if you only want to know which kings of Poland, let's say, are Elizabeth II's ancestors, you can check that. You can just skip over to that. But that is essentially what I'll be doing in this video. I'll just be doing a list of all of Elizabeth II's royal ancestors, even the ones I didn't mention. And I'll be doing for all of them for every major European country. Alright, and so now, some royal ancestors of Elizabeth II that you may have heard of. So we are going to start off with the Franks. And that is because the first royal ancestor of Elizabeth II was the first king of the Franks, Clovis I, who ruled from 509 to 511. Other kings of the Franks include Clothar I from 558 to 561, Pepin the Short from 751 to 768, Charlemagne from 768 to 814, Louis the Pious from 814 to 840, Hugh Capet from 987 to 996, Robert II from 987 to 1031, Henry I from 1027 to 1060, Philip I from 1060 to 1108, Louis VI from 1108 to 1137, Louis VII from 1131 to 1180, and Philip II from 1179 to 1190. Now, as for specifically Western Francia, we have Charles the Bald from 840 to 877, Louis the Stammerer from 877 to 879, Charles the Simple from 898 to 922, Robert I 922 to 923, and Louis IV from 936 to 954. So, 1190, Philip II changed his title from King of the Franks to King of France, and so now we will be looking at the kings of France who were her ancestors. So we have Philip II from 1190 to 1223, Louis VIII from 1223 to 1226, Louis IX from 1226 to 1270, Philip III from 1270 to 1285, Philip IV from 1280 to 1314, Louis X from 1314 to 1316, Philip VI 1328 to 1350, John II 1350 to 1364, Charles V 1364 to 1380, and the final royal king of France who was Elizabeth II's ancestor was Charles VI from 1380 to 1422. Now, of course, Charlemagne was king of the Franks, but he was also the first Holy Roman Emperor, and so we will look at all of her Holy Roman Emperor ancestors. Alright, so we have Charlemagne from 800 to 814, Louis the Pious from 814 to 840, Charles the Bald from 875 to 877, Berengar I of Italy, 915 to 924, Otto I, 962 to 973, Otto II, 967 to 983, Conrad II, 1027 to 1039, Henry III, 1046 to 1056, Henry IV, 1084 to 1105, Frederick I, 1155 to 1190, Henry VI, 1191 to 1197, Frederick II, 1220 to 1245/1250, Lothair III, 1133 to 1137, Henry VII, 1312 to 1313, Louis IV, 1328 to 1347, Charles IV, 1355 to 1378, Sigismund, 1433 to 1437, Frederick III, 1452 to 1493, Maximilian I, 1508 to 1519, and finally Ferdinand I, 1558 to 1564. Now, what might surprise you is that some of Elizabeth II's ancestors were also kings of Italy, and these three were Berengar I, 887 to 924, Berengar II, 950 to 961, and Henry VII, 1311 to 1313. Now, of course, a lot of the Holy Roman Emperors ruled over Austria, and these were Rudolf I, 1278 to 1282, Albert I, 1282 to 1308, Albert II, 1404 to 1439, Frederick III, 1457 to 1493, Maximilian I, 1493 to 1519, and Ferdinand I, 1521 to 1564. Now, of course, we know that the rulers of Austria also oftentimes rule over Hungary, and so one of her ancestors was the first king of the Hungarians, Arpad, from 895 to 907, but a lot of her ancestors were just simply the kings of Hungary, and these were Andrew I, 1046 to 1060, Bela I, 1060 to 1063, Geza I, 1074 to 1077, Ladislaus I, 1077 to 1095, Bela II, 1131 to 1141, Geza II, 1141 to 1162, Bela III, 1172 to 1196, Andrew II, 1205 to 1235, Bela IV, 1235 to 1270, Stephen V, 1270 to 1272, Sigismund, 1387 to 1437, Albert II, 1437 to 1439, Vladislaus II, 1490 to 1516, Ferdinand I, 1526 to 1564. Now, another Eastern European kingdom where a lot of Elizabeth II's royal ancestors were from was Poland. And so, the kings of the Polands, because that's what it was originally called, these were Mieszko I, 960 to 992, and Boleslav I, 992 to 1025. But as for the kings of Poland itself, again, Boleslav I in 1025, who was the first king of Poland, and the other ones being Mieszko II Lambert, 1025 to 1031, and 1032 to 1034, Casimir I, the Restorer, 1040 to 1058, Boleslav II the Generous, 1058 to 1079, Vladislav I Herman, 1079 to 1102, Boleslav III Wrymouth, 1102 to 1138, Vladislav II the Exile, 1138 to 1146, Mieszko III, 1173 to 1177, 1191, 1198 to 1199, and 1202. Yes, he ruled 4 times. Jaduga, 1384 to 1399, Vladislav II Jagiello, 1386 to 1434, Casimir IV Jagiellon, 1447 to 1492, and Sigismund I the Old, 1506 to 1548. Now, as we know, a country that was a vassal, but then later became the country that killed Poland, was Prussia. And as I mentioned in the Reformation video, Elizabeth II is descended from the first king of Prussia, 1525, Albert, who ruled from 1525 to 1568, but other kings of Prussia she's descended from are Albert Frederick from 1568 to 1618, Frederick I, 1688 to 1713, and Frederick William I from 1713 to 1740. The kings of Portugal she was descended from are Afonso I from 1139 to 1185, Sancho I 1185 to 1211, Afonso II 1211 to 1223, Afonso III 1248 to 1279, Denis 1279 to 1325, Afonso IV 1325 to 1357, Peter I 1357 to 1367, John I 1385 to 1433, and Edward from 1433 to 1438. Now, of course, next to Portugal is Castile, and Those ones are Isabella I, 1474 to 1504, Ferdinand II, 1475 to 1504, their daughter Joanna from 1504 to 1555, and her husband Philip I in 1506. Now going north, the Danish kings she's descended from are actually quite a few. Valdemar I, 1154 to 1182, Valdemar II, 1202 to 1241, Eric IV, 1232 to 1250, Christian I, 1448 to 1481, John I, 1481 to 1513, Frederick I, 1523 to 1533, Christian III, 1534 to 1559, Frederick II, 1559 to 1588, Christian IV, 1588 to 1648, Frederick III, 1648 to 1670, Christian V, 1670 to 1699, Frederick V, 1699 to 1730, Christian VI, 1730 to 1746, Frederick V, 1746 to 1766, and finally Christian IX, from 1863 to 1906. Now, for a long time, Denmark ruled over Norway, and so it's no surprise that a lot of Norwegian kings are our ancestors as well. These are Olaf II from 1015 to 1028, Harald Hardrada from 1046 to 1066, Olaf III from 1067 to 1093, Magnus Barefoot from 1093 to 1103, Sigurd II 1136 to 1155, Hakon III 1202 to 1204, Hakon IV 1217 to 1263, Magnus VI 1263 to 1280, Hakon V 1299 to 1319, Christian I 1450 to 1481, John I 1483 to 1513, Frederick I 1524 to 1533, Christian III 1537 to 1559, Frederick II 1559 to 1588, Christian IV 1588 to 1648, Frederick III 1648 to 1670, Christian V 1670 to 1699, Frederick IV 1699 to 1730, Christian VI 1730 to 1746, and Frederick V 1746 to 1766. So, and of course we can't mention Denmark and Norway without mentioning Sweden. And so her Swedish royal ancestors are Eric the Victorious 970 to 995, Eric the Ninth 1156 to 1160, Canute the First 1167 to 1196, Eric the 10th 1208 to 1216, Magnus the Third 1275 to 1290, Christian the First 1457 to 1464, John the First 1497 to 1501, and Gustav the First 1523 to 1560. Now, one country that was basically started by Swedes was Kievan Rus, and of course a lot of her ancestors also ruled over there. These were Igor 914 to 945, Olga 945 to 960s, Sviatoslav the First 960s to 972, Vladimir the Great 980 to 1015, Yaroslav the Wise 1019 to 1054, Izyaslav the First 1054 to 1073, Sviatoslav II 1073 to 1077, Vsevolod the First 1076 to 1093, Sviatopolk II 1093 to 1113, Vladimir II Monomakh 1113 to 1125, Mstislav the First 1125 to 1132, Vsevolod II 1139 to 1146, Sviatoslav III, who ruled 1174, 1177 to 1180, and 1182 to 1194, and Vsevolod IV, who ruled from 1203, 1206, 1207, and 1208 to 1212, and Michael of Chernigov, 1236 to 1240, 1240, and 1241 to 1243. Now, interestingly enough, some of Elizabeth II's ancestors were even Eastern Roman emperors. These were Alexios I Komnenos, 1081 to 1118, John II Komnenos, 1118 to 1143, Alexios III, 1195 to 1203, Isaac II Angelos, 1185 to 1195 and 1203 to 1204, Michael VIII Palaiologos, 1261 to 1282, and Andronikos II Palaiologos from 1282 to 1238. Going back to Western Europe, rulers of Burgundy were Gunther, who ruled until 437, Gondiac from 437 to 473, Chilperic II, 473 to 493, Philip the Bold, 1363 to 1404, John the Fearless, 1404 to 1419, Philip the Good, 1419 to 1467, Charles the Bold, 1467 to 1477, Maximilian I, 1477 to 1482, and Philip I from 1482 to 1506. Now, moving on to Sicily. There was Roger I from 1071 to 1101, Roger II from 1105 to 1154, Henry VI from 1194 to 1197, Frederick II from 1198 to 1250, Frederick III from 1296 to 1337, Ferdinand II from 1468 to 1516, and Joanna from 1516 to 1556. Now, what I found really surprising and interesting is that some of her ancestors even ruled Jerusalem. These were Baldwin II from 1118 to 1131, Fulk from 1131 to 1143, Amalric from 1162 to 1174, Isabella I 1190/1192 to 1205. Meanwhile, in the neighboring Crusader state of Antioch, some of her ancestors were Bohemond I 1098 to 1111, Bohemond II 1111/1119 to 1130, Constance 1130 to 1163, Bohemond III 1163 to 1201, and Bohemond IV 1201 to 1216, and 1219 to 1233. And now, finally, guys, we get to Britain. This is the moment you were all waiting for. And so first we will start off with her Scottish royal ancestors. So the kings of the Picts that she's descended from are Kenneth MacAlpin from 843 to 858, and Causentin MacCanada from 862 to 877. Soon after, the kingdom of the Picts became known as Alba, and its kings were Donald II, 889 to 900, Malcolm I, 943 to 954, and Kenneth II from 971 to 995. Then this became known as the Kingdom of the Scots, and its rulers were Malcolm II from 1005 to 1034, Duncan I from 1034 to 1040, Malcolm III from 1058 to 1093, David I from 1124 to 1153, Robert the Bruce from 1306 to 1329, Robert II 1371 to 1390, Robert III from 1390 to 1406, James I from 1406 to 1437, James II from 1437 to 1460, James III from 1460 to 1488, James IV from 1488 to 1513, James V from 1513 to 1542, and then no, I'm just kidding. Now there's Mary from 1542 to 1567, but James VI from 1567 to 1625. Then we finally get on to England. So, of course, as many of you know, England was formed by the Kingdom of Wessex, and its kings that she's descended from are Egbert from 802 to 839, Aethelwulf from 839 to 858, and Alfred the Great from 871 to 886. Then Alfred the Great became the first king of the Anglo-Saxons in 886 and ruled till 899, succeeded by his son Edward the Elder from 899 to 924. This country then became known as the Kingdom of the English, and the ancestors that she's descended from, who were kings of the English, were Edmund I from 939 to 946, Edgar the Peaceful 959 to 975, Ethelred the Unready 978 to 1013 and 1014 to 1016, Edmund Ironside in 1016, and Harold Godwinson in 1066. Now, as for England, we have William the Conqueror 1066 to 1087, Henry I 1100 to 1135, Matilda 1141 to 1148, Stephen 1141 to 1154, Henry II 1154 to 1189, John 1199 to 1216, Henry III 1216 to 1272, Edward I 1272 to 1307, Edward II 1307 to 1327, Edward III 1327 to 1377, Edward VI 1461 to 1470, Henry VII 1485 to 1509, and James I 1603 to 1625. Then, eventually, as we know, England became Great Britain after uniting with Scotland, and its rulers were the three Georges: George I 1714 to 1727, George II 1727 to 1760, and George III 1760 to 1801, after which it became the United Kingdom, and George III continued to rule till 1820. And then finally we get to her very most recent ancestors, which I mentioned in the last video: Victoria from 1837 to 1901, Edward VII from 1901 to 1910, George V 1910 to 1936, and finally George VI from 1936 to 1952. So wow, that's been 20 minutes, and yes, despite all that, these are not even every single one of her royal ancestors. These are only all the royal ancestors from important countries, France, Holy Roman Empire, Italy, Austria, Hungary, Poland, Prussia, Portugal, Castile, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Kiev, the Eastern Roman Empire, Burgundy, Sicily, Jerusalem, Antioch, Scotland, and England. And there are so many royal ancestors from a bunch of tiny German countries that I didn't even mention. But obviously, that would take too long, and this video would never end. Again, sorry this video was a little more boring. It was just a really long list. But this is really just for the hardcore nerds out there who want to know every single ancestor of Elizabeth II from the royal families of certain countries. And so, again, you can skip to different parts to know about the country that interests you the most. But with all that finally being said, having looked at all her very important ancestors and at all her ancestors from who ruled over important countries, next week we will finally reveal the great mystery of what exactly Elizabeth II's DNA test results would be, what percentage of each ethnicity she has, and then we'll compare it to Useful Charts video, which is the entire reason I wasted 2 years of my life doing all this research. So anyways, guys, see you there. If you made it this far, which probably nobody has, if you made it this far, thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.